Thank you for waiting. So now I'd like to welcome our first keynote speaker, the Hon Alex Hawke, who was appointed Minister for International Development and the Pacific after the election in May this year. At the same time, he was appointed Assistant Defence Minister. He was elected to the Federal Parliament in 2007 and has held previous positions as Assistant Minister to the Treasurer, Assistant Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, Assistant Minister for Home Affairs and Special Minister of State. So welcome, Alex Hawke.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Zara, for that introduction. It's great to be able to be here this morning, given that the Parliament is sitting, and it's still a very tight Parliament, and it has been for a long time, so leave is difficult to procure. But Zara was telling me on the way in that she spoke less than time by about 5 minutes, and you're ahead of schedule, which is really, I thought, an invitation to speak longer, Zara. So I can certainly speak. It's a core skill of a political leader in today's day and age, so I'm happy to put you right off schedule again after my remarks. Look, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to be here this morning. It really is a privilege. I want to acknowledge, of course, that you'll have other speakers here today. Zara I missed, unfortunately, but Penny Wong is coming. Your Excellencies that are here, Director General Simons, and of course the government officials, our excellent Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade people that are here, both departments that I administer as a Minister in 2 portfolios. So I want to thank all of you for the work that you've done and that you continue to do on our behalf. I'd start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the elders, past, present and emerging, the Ngunnawal people, and again record it's a great opportunity to be here after 5 months in the role. I visited about 9 countries in that time and certainly had an exhausting introduction to foreign affairs and trade as a minister, given the relativities of the times that we're in. But, you know, I'll speak a little bit about why we're so busy in the Pacific region in a moment. I think I'm struck today by the depth of the expertise and the experience, the professionalism that you bring to these matters that we're discussing. And I know today we're discussing agendas for a new world. I think that's a very timely theme, given that we are approaching a new world order. It's a big topic to cover. It's a very important discussion. Thinking forward, dealing with the times that we're having is very important, and it's very difficult to address it in 20 minutes of remarks. I'm glad I've got an extra 5 minutes, Zara. Look, I think we all know the world is changing. I think we know that the strategic, economic, technological environment is rapidly evolving in today's world. And I think we also know that populism, protectionism, illiberalism have really jolted the international system in recent times. And we're still seeing the consequences of that even today. These should really be a starting point for the discussions today. These are new themes and new features that are really jolting the international order. But today I want to say a few remarks about the government's view on stability, security, prosperity and, importantly, sovereignty and our plan to achieve all of those things in our foreign affairs. To put simply, though, I want to start a little bit about the principles and partnerships, partnerships being a key theme from our government's perspective that we see as critical to navigating the choppy waters that we do face internationally and here in our region. You all know that Australia has a principled foreign policy, and we know we've got a foreign policy grounded in Australian principles and Australian values. It's representative of our Australian people's approach, and the pragmatism that we bring to the implementation of those values and those principles, I think, reflects the spirit of Australia. Pragmatic action based on our values and our principles. The overarching principle of Australian foreign policy is ensuring that our policies and actions are grounded in Australia's national interest. And I think you might have seen that from the Prime Minister's Lowy address that he gave recently, where he said that we must cultivate, marshal and bring our influence to bear to protect and promote our national interests. And he also said that we must ensure our national interests remain paramount. But what are the principles that underpin our national interest? Well, they're important ones. And firstly, of course, it's about protecting and promoting the values and who we are. Australia values freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of worship, freedom of association. And we use our Human Rights Council membership, our bilateral engagements, to make clear our concerns when these values are threatened. any human rights violations around the world, whether it's in the Rakhine State or whether it's in Xinjiang. Australia speaks out when values are challenged internationally. We value the sovereignty, the resilience, the independence of all states so that they can exist freely and without the threat of coercion, particularly in our backyard in the Pacific region. So we're standing up, of course, as we always have, for the international order, for the rules and the norms that we've all grown up with, that we know are under threat and under challenge now, but the rights of states big and small, and we have many, many small partners and neighbours in the Pacific whose sovereignty is, of course, under pressure. We support many activities internationally still that are very significant in today's day and age. Flights and freedom of navigation action in the South China Sea and in the Straits of Hormuz just recently. But also we value freedom of exchange, freedom of endeavour, freedom of enterprise and, of course, free trade. We're working hard to open up markets, support the free flow of goods, services, capital and ideas, realising that free trade and the free trade system is vital to the international order, vital to the flow or an exchange of free countries, and of course promotes the rule of international law, another vital feature of the international system. And we're working to coalesce commitment by all states to share the burden of collective challenges, again guided by the rules and the institutions. And we're optimistic that this can still be maintained in the face of the challenges that I mentioned earlier. The second principle that I want to reinforce, and it's absolutely an important priority for the Morrison government, is a stronger Australian economy. We talk a lot about what we do in foreign affairs, but why? Why do we talk about a stronger economy? Because all of our national security in foreign affairs is to ensure we secure prosperity for Australia, for Australia's partners, for our region, our family in the Pacific. And if we lose sight of the fact that the national security apparatus, the foreign affairs apparatus, is to provide the basic fundamental underpinning of a strong economy and prosperity for average Australians, then we've lost sight of the mission. A robust economy that enables stability, a robust economy that enables prosperity, supports all of our diplomatic endeavours and our national security, and it enables us to do so much good that we do in our development work and in the Pacific. Our prosperity is the result of generations of work. It's been handed to us. We sometimes call ourselves a lucky country, but our luck is predicated on hard work and understanding that when economic prosperity faces new challenges in our region and beyond, Australia has to be vocal in defence of economic freedom and free trade. That's why our government has ramped up the trade agenda. We've concluded or negotiated trade deals with 17 out of our top 20 trading partners. 70% of our two-way trade is now covered by trade agreements, and this is up 26% when this government got elected in 2013. An impressive achievement. In the last 6 years alone, we've secured duty-free or preferential access to an extra 1.7 billion customers for Australian markets. The domestic economic reform agenda has also equipped Australians with the confidence and capability to trade, invest and grow our economy into the big economies of the world, into the small economies of the world, into the medium economies of our region. But you can't have a strong economy without strong security, so we're also taking the steps, the necessary steps, to shore up the resilience of our institutions here in Australia, prevent foreign interference, and equip our national security agencies with the resources they need to keep Australians safe. And if you think about the suite of legislation that this government has brought in, whether it's establishing tighter rules around foreign investment in critical national infrastructure, whether it's about, importantly, banning foreign donations into the Australian political system. The action that this government has taken in this space has really shored up the ability of Australia to stand strong and continue to be the strong international player that we all want it to be. It cannot be understated that a strong, secure, sovereign region fundamentally enables economic prosperity. We will never forget this and will continue to take action in the national security space to make sure Australia is strong. The third principle I want to speak about today, of course, is to strengthen the Indo-Pacific region. It's a real privilege to be able to be the Minister for the Pacific and the Minister for International Development, and of course have the Assistant Defence Ministry as well, given that the defence cooperation in our region represents some of the long-standing agreements, arrangements and links that we have with so many different countries in the Indo-Pacific. As the PM said when we announced the step-up To step up, we need to show up. Probably people aren't aware here, but this calendar year, we've seen 54 visits by ministers and senior level government officials in Australia into the Pacific. 54 this calendar year. That's showing up. As I said, I have in 5 months visited and had important relations with 9 Pacific countries just since the election. Why are we working so hard? Why are we spending so much time in the Pacific? Well, as the Prime Minister says regularly, the Pacific is our family, the Pacific is our neighbourhood, the Pacific is our backyard, and indeed it's the key to Australia's economic prosperity, our future security, and of course our ability to be a good international player. If we can't have a strong and vibrant and prosperous Pacific, then our credibility internationally would be under threat. This has brought enormous opportunity, and I want to speak a little bit about it. In a new era of strategic competition, a not unnatural result of the shifting dynamics and the power dynamics in our modern and multipolar globalised world, I think we see the challenges that we face. We've grown up in a world and grown accustomed to a world where peace, security and prosperity has been underwritten by the United States. And the US remains deeply engaged, of course, with us as a government, with Australia, with our region, and a strategically important partner in the Indo-Pacific as a resident power. But we know, of course, the playing field has changed. Like all great powers, a stronger China inevitably seeks to influence this region to suit its own interests. And the US is also seeking to negotiate a very complex set of issues at its economic relationship with China, such as the treatment of foreign investment, the protection of intellectual property, and of course the balance of trade. And we're all feeling the consequences of this. Australia's been very vocal about our interests in this space, in the trade deal between China and the United States, and I think all of us can be proud of the role Scott Morrison has played internationally in reinforcing Australia's view that it is in no one's interest to have this trade dynamic continue. We want to see a trade agreement between China and the United States concluded, but the Prime Minister has also retained a healthy optimism between the two partners to reinforce that we believe this can be achieved in spite of the obstacles, in spite of the difficulties that are presented. And Australia's role between, I think, China and the United States in the trade space is very important as a voice of optimism and a voice of reason about the free trade possibilities. We know, of course, that security continues to risk a threat to our principles and to our way of life as well, and we remain vigilant on maritime security, focused on non-proliferation, and steadfast in our efforts to counter terrorism and violent extremism, whether it's in Mosul or Marawi. And I know you're speaking about technological challenges at this conference today, so obviously a time for us to focus on that. But I do want to say Australia and Australian security will continue to fundamentally rely on our alliance with the United States in our region and our alliance with the United States in the world. It also means that Australia will continue to work closely with our partners on the development challenges that we face in our region. And I want to turn to the development side of my portfolio and speak about it briefly. We're implementing an innovative, targeted and effective development assistance program in the Pacific with a strong focus here on many countries in our near neighbourhood. I'm proud this year that we will make our largest ever assistance contribution in development terms of $1.4 billion to the Pacific region. And I think it's important to remember that will be Australia's largest ever assistance contribution. The challenges in the Indo-Pacific require no less, and they require a more active and engaged Australia, which is why we have stepped up and why we continue to step up. You know about the visits, you know about the officials that I've mentioned, and I'm going to keep mentioning it, but you may not know, of course, that this will also be the Australian government that will spend the most ever, $500 million, on climate change in the Pacific region specifically. It shows we're listening, it shows we're hearing the message of Pacific partner countries and dealing and tackling with the challenges that they are raising with us. It's not new, of course. Australia has had a great partnership with the Pacific over many decades. We've worked very hard on it. Our defence cooperation, of course, goes back many, many decades with countries like PNG. But the key to prosecuting and securing our interests in the Indo-Pacific lies in the partnerships and the strong partnerships that we build, not just with Pacific countries, but also the interests of other countries that they have from the near Pacific. And I'm speaking, of course, about the countries and the powerful countries in our region, one is our closest ally, the United States, and the other is our trading partner, our largest trading partner in strategic competition. But it would be remiss of me not to mention, of course, our great partnership with New Zealand, our partnerships with Japan that have existed for so long, our trading relationship with Japan, our partnerships with France, our partnerships with the United Kingdom. All of these are at the forefront of what Australia is doing and negotiating in the Pacific region right now, every single day. And I think you can see the fruits of the results of what we're doing. New Zealand has its Step Up program implemented in the Pacific. Japan has announced a reset of its activity in the Pacific. We're seeing greater enhanced involvement from France. We see India looking at the Pacific region closely. And you may note, of course, that Prime Minister Morrison will visit India for a state visit in January next year, and we expect further strategic development of engagement in the Indo-Pacific between Australia and India. The Prime Minister has also just returned from the United States, and you know that we reaffirmed the alliance and the commitment of our foreign policy. The alliance is the cornerstone of that foreign policy. It's always going to be the bedrock of our security. But of course, you may also know I've just returned from Fiji with the Prime Minister as well. And while the Australian government will continue to prioritise the US as our key alliance, Australian relations with Fiji are in the best shape they have been for decades. We're prioritising that relationship every single day. You will have seen an announcement on an important matter to Fiji, to Vanuatu, to other Pacific countries in the form of kava imports. Now, why would I mention that here in front of all of you today? Well, it's because it shows once again that the Australian government is very focused on what matters to the Pacific as much as we are focused on what matters to the United States. We listen carefully on a traditional issue like kava. We've granted extra access for personal use to our market. We've also agreed to a commercial import trial, which of course is something that is important to the economies of the Pacific, important to relations, and the fact that we are genuine in listening, hearing what they have to say, and addressing one by one the issues that will enable even closer economic cooperation. In his Lowy address, the Prime Minister said that we look at our partnerships with the US and China, but we're not in the business of picking a side. We're in the business, of course, of picking a side in relation to the Pacific. Unquestionably, Australia is on the Pacific's side every single day, at every single international forum. And we work with the Pacific to strengthen their economic resilience, their prosperity, their future, secure their countries against climate change, and to do more with them to partner and make sure that our peoples have that close Vivale relationship that we built on there in Fiji just on the weekend. So today, of course, I've spoken a little bit about the values. I've spoken a little bit about what we're doing in the Indo-Pacific. There is so much more. And when I'm invited to speak at a forum like this and speak about Pacific matters in the Indo-Pacific, what we're doing, what Australia is seeking to do, I could really speak all day. And I know, Zara, you invited me to speak for a lot longer than I was allowed. However, I would just point out that, if you think about the headline things that Australia does in the Pacific, including the Pacific Maritime Security Program, it's impossible to think of any time in history that a country in any region had a program to gift 21 high-tech maritime patrol boats to a dozen partner countries to secure not only their sovereignty, but also to secure their economic prosperity. That's what Australia does. It's what we've been doing for 30 years. And the Pacific Maritime Security Program is a program every Australian could be proud of because we help train, operate and sustain the patrol boats in the Pacific. And what that does is enable them to secure their economic future and their economic prosperity for themselves, especially tackling the scourge of illegal fishing and what we have seen in that space. So we're integrating Pacific economies with the Australian economy. We're working very hard on the security space in ways that many other countries don't do. Sometimes Australia comes under criticism for not doing enough on climate change, for not doing enough on security. But as I said, Australia is a player in the Pacific that does more than anyone else. We do it willingly. We do it for our family. We do it for our neighbourhood. We do it because we actually care, guided by our values and principles. And Australia ensures that we're integrating the Pacific economies, that we're securing their sovereignty, that we're giving them the tools to be able to secure their economic prosperity. And our ambitious agenda, of course, will continue with our infrastructure financing facility in the Pacific, $2 billion to secure greater infrastructure projects. We see, of course, a greater commitment to security. We're stepping up our security-enhanced relationships, whether that be more people visiting here to study at our colleges or our defence facilities. And importantly, Australia is doing more than any other partner country. And I defy anyone here to think of another country that does more on climate change in the Pacific and for the Pacific. We're proud of the record of our officials and the work and the money and the investment that it comes from the Australian people on doing what Australia always does, pragmatic work to deal and tackle with climate change and climate resilience on the ground level in partnership with countries in the Pacific. And having spent a week in Tuvalu at the Pacific Islands Forum, I can tell you it's greatly appreciated by partner countries, the work that Australia pragmatically does country to country. Now, it's true that we may be deprioritising multilateral engagement with some of our climate funding, but all of that climate funding and all of that funds that would have gone to a multilateral agency will go to climate resilience and climate change in the Pacific. But we know through our agencies, we know through our work that we can deliver a better outcome for Pacific partners, direct. We can do more to mitigate against climate change country to country, bilaterally, but also working together in partnership regionally with regional countries, with our partners from New Zealand, with our partners from Japan, with our partners from the US. We can do more with that money directly on the ground in a faster way to deal with the impacts of climate change, and we're spending more than any other government has in Australian history to make sure that we achieve this. So finally, I just want to say we do see greater threats in our region from military technology, and I think you know that advanced military threats in the future with more states able to project more, further, faster and to greater effect is a threat. In the next 2 decades, we're also ensuring that we spend heavily on defence and defence industry to ensure the security of our region. I said at the CPAL conference that in the next 2 decades, half of the world's submarines will operate in the Indo-Pacific. Half of the world's submarines will be operational within the Indo-Pacific. More autonomous systems will be operating underwater and in the air, and all countries, of course, will have access to ballistic missile technologies. These are big challenges for the government to grapple with in security terms as well. That's why we're key signatories and partners in the Boy Declaration. These are challenges that directly engage the principles and the values that I've spoken about. And it's why our government will continue to spend an increased amount on defence, an increased amount of our GDP, back up to 2%, and of course on regionally superior submarines and capabilities. So having returned from Fiji and recording to you that our relationship hasn't been better for a long period of time, it's going to continue to get better. And having returned from 9 countries in the last few months in the Pacific, I can say to you that people are very grateful for the work that our government is doing to step up the relationships that we have in the Pacific. Our partner countries and Australia are working closer than ever before on economics, on prosperity, on people-to-people links, on security, on climate change, on every facet that affects Pacific nations. And I think today we can all be proud of the role that Australia plays in our region and in our world. It's a pragmatic foreign policy, there's no doubt about it. It's certainly in Australians' interests. But Australia's interests in the Pacific will always be the health, well-being and prosperity of our partner countries and the people within it. Today's conference, of course, is a testament to the importance of maintaining our national dialogue and the global challenges and the opportunities that we face and the direction of Australia's foreign policy, and I commend you to it. The Morrison government will continue to maintain a ruthless and pragmatic focus on our national interests, but also ensure that the Pacific interests are at the forefront of our regional engagement and of the world's thinking in relation to its foreign policy. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the extension today, Zara, the extension of time, and I look forward to some questions and hearing from you a little bit at this conference today.
Thank you very much.
All right. Very happy to.
So we have time for a few questions. Could you please state your name and any relevant affiliation? Right, I see Richard Bronowski there. Where are the microphones? Here, please. And I'll get the second one lined up.
There's one here, in front of you there.
Minister Richard Bronowski, AIIA New South Wales. Very interesting what you talk about climate change and how you're handling it. The press would indicate that recent visits by your government and our Prime Minister to Fiji have been rather disastrous because we're not doing anything, he thinks, the Pacific countries think, to really ameliorate the problem, which would mean cutting our coal exports, probably stopping new coal mines. Now, but I hear what you say, and it's very interesting. But tell me, you say we're spending $500 million on climate change in the Pacific. We're also spending $2 billion on infrastructural projects in the Pacific. Does this include building walls around islands? What does it include? Could you be more specific, please?
Look, thank you for the question, and obviously there's a few components to it. Yes. Look, I'm happy to restate about climate change in the Pacific. The tenor of our discussions with our partner countries is very positive about climate change. And I think we're all aware in 2019, as we're aware about the threats from populism, the threats from protectionism, the threats from illiberalism challenging the order. We're also aware of the inadequacies, I think, of the international press sometimes on some of these issues, where they act more as advocates and sort of a protest movement rather than reporting facts. In a week in Tuvalu, I spent very carefully listening to all of the regional leadership on climate change and the requirements and the needs of climate change. And I have to say that's what our officials spend a lot of their time in the region working with partner countries doing. And I accept fully, I think it is the fault of the Australian government, that we have not done enough to promote what Australia is doing on climate change in the Pacific. And I think you'll see more from this government speaking directly to audiences like this and the Australian public about what it is we actually do day to day on the ground. So in the infrastructure financing facility, for example, it's a good question that you ask. There is a climate window within the infrastructure financing facility. And why do we have a climate window built in to the $2 billion program? Well, that's because we've listened very carefully to partner countries about their needs in relation to climate, and we agree with them that climate change is a substantial threat to their economic future and also to the livelihood of many people. It always has been in low-lying atolls and islands, and it will continue to be. So our climate window means that you'll see projects coming on, and we want to see those projects in mitigation and preparation for adaptation, climate adaptation, when we've encouraged the private sector to bring forward projects on climate adaptation. We're encouraging the private sector, our officials work day to day in the region and with partners, investment partners around the world to bring on climate mitigation adaptation projects, but also climate resilience. And if you think about even the ability for us to invest in renewable energy throughout the Pacific and reduce reliance on very expensive and very difficult climate reliance on diesel generators throughout the Pacific, I think you'll see this money and this investment in this project bring on very significant climate projects as well as other projects. And no, there won't be walls built. And Australia, you can be sure when we invest in something, we make sure we're thinking about the appropriateness of that development for partner countries, the sustainment of it, and the usefulness of it to different partner countries. And the Australia Infrastructure Financing Facility, I think, is a wonderful initiative to put real direct investment and grip up more partners to invest in all of the projects that I'm talking about. It's a signature initiative. It's only just opened in July, and I'd say to you that already we have a huge pipeline of projects approaching them. Now, we do have to make sure that they are viable. We have to make sure that they're successful. But we're very closely working with all of the partner countries in the region to make sure that they're appropriate, that they're on the needs of partner countries, that they're supported by those governments, and they tackle important issues like climate change, mitigation and adaptation.
We've got time for one more question, I think.
Yes, good morning and thank you, Mr Hawke. My name's Peter Grulemans. I am affiliated with the Sydney West Peace Group, a small community group that's interested in peace for our world and society. My question relates to your predominance with the United States alliance. And the theme of our conference today is New Agendas for a New Era. Have you never brainstormed and considered the opportunity for Australia to become neutral rather than allied with the United States? Even our chairwoman today said that the US continues to be a source of instability in the world. I hope I'm quoting you correctly. Please comment on brainstorming what our new era would be like without an alliance with the United States, given its roles in World Wars I, II, 9/11 and the global financial crisis. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. And look, peace is something that I think all rational actors want to see achieved in our world. And obviously peace has to be worked at and fought for and continually underpinned by the values and the principles that I've spoken about here in Australia. One reason that we don't brainstorm a change to this alliance, and not something I would contemplate either, is because, again, the United States of America is, of course, the bedrock of Australian security in our region. Why? Because we share values with the United States. We share the values and principles of a free world. The only reason that Australia would reconsider that fundamental alliance or that bedrock is if there was a change in the values of the United States. But the United States is still, in the world today, one of the nations most committed to freedom of economic aspects, freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom of worship. It's a nation fundamentally built on the values that we're built on. We are like countries, and our alliance will continue to underpin the new world because we fundamentally share those values. And America and Australia have always been there for each other and will continue to always be there for each other. And it's important to have bedrocks in alliances. So the government doesn't see any change in a new era to that because we respect America, we respect its values, we respect that we share those values, and regardless of what administration you are speaking about in the United States, what relationship you're talking about, there have been testing times between different administrations in Australia and America in the past. The alliance has always remained strong because of those fundamental connection of values, and will continue to share them. And if you think about the role that America does play in the world today, in peace, in securing the peace, in fighting for the peace, Australia also plays that role in the world today. We want peace, we want to fight for peace, we want to secure peace. It's one of the great ironies, and I'm sure you'll know as a peace movement, that to secure peace for the world, you have to be prepared to fight for it. And you have to be prepared to fight for the values that secure peace. America is, Australia is, and we'll be doing that together for the next era as well. Thank you.
Would you all join with me in thanking the Minister for his contribution this morning?